Hi everybody, I hope this finds you doing well. I wanted to show the latest feature I've added to Illuminated Cloud. It's full support for GraphQL, and specifically GraphQL when used with Lightning Web Components and the Salesforce Lightning Web Components GraphQL API, though I think as the demo will show, it's broader than that. It is all in the constraints of executing GraphQL queries against your S objects in their fields, and we'll look at how the schema gets populated and such for that. But it's broader than just Lightning Web Components. I think it'll make good sense as we dive into the demo. One thing I want to point out on the front end is that this entire demo is actually in one of JetBrains' free Community Edition IDEs. And the main reason I point that out is to show that everything that I'm going to be showing here, everything I'm going to be demonstrating is available in all of the JetBrains IDEs supported by Illuminated Cloud, not just the commercial IDEs. Now, what it does require is the JetBrains GraphQL plugin, which is not something that's bundled with those IDEs. It's something that's available through the marketplace. It's an open source plugin from JetBrains for this specific language for GraphQL, and so we need to have it installed. Now, Illuminated Cloud is going to look at the open file, and if it is a Lightning Web Components JavaScript or TypeScript file, and it has GraphQL queries in it, it's going to prompt you to install the GraphQL plugin if you haven't already. So like, here's a TypeScript file, this is a JavaScript file, we see the exact same thing. Now, if you don't want any of the features I'm about to show, you can just disable this whole thing. Don't ask again. It will tell you it's going to actually disable this integration, but you can re-enable it. We'll do that, and it's gone. It's exactly like it was before. Now, of course, for this demo, I do want it enabled, so I'm going to open the application level settings, which may not look quite familiar to you from here over because I've actually decomposed other into several different other tabs, and then you of course have a new GraphQL tab. So I'm going to re-enable GraphQL configuration management, and we're going to circle back around to that second option and talk about what it means as it makes sense in the demo. And so we get that same suggestion back. Excuse me. So we're going to go ahead and say install GraphQL, and it's going to show the GraphQL plugins from JetBrains. Of course, the one we want is just GraphQL. These other ones are our Ultimate Edition plugins. So we're going to go ahead, excuse me, and install that. And I'm just going to say restart the IDE, and it's going to restart, and we'll have GraphQL support. But it won't be the last thing that we need because as you'll see in just a moment, while these queries are now going to have syntax highlighting and such, they are going to show some issues. So now we can see that things are red. So it's saying that while we have the ability to get say code completion for keywords, GraphQL keywords, other things are not resolvable. We can see by hovering over it that UI API does not resolve to a valid schema type. Neither does account. Things like that. Again, the same thing's true over here in our TypeScript file. So no real difference between TypeScript and JavaScript for this purpose. All right, and the reason for that is that your S objects and their fields and the operations that are available and the aggregates and functions, it doesn't know anything about those kind of a priori. So we have to make it so that it knows about them, and the way we do that is use good old context actions. I'm going to hit Alt-Enter in Windows or Linux, Opt-Enter on a Mac, and we can see that there is a context action called retrieve Salesforce GraphQL schema, and that's going to use the project's active connection, configure connection, to hit the GraphQL API endpoint and run what's called an introspection query. And an introspection query is effectively requesting the metadata by which other queries are executed. And so you can see it just retrieved it, it's transforming it. That transformation has taken JSON response and turning it into something called SDL, and it retrieved this file. Illuminated Cloud has set it down in the same general area where it puts the dynamically generated LWC types and stuff used for JavaScript and TypeScript development, and put it into a GraphQL area. And this is a large file because it includes all your S objects, all their fields, really everything that you need. There are some issues I'll show you in just a little bit, some things that seem to be inaccuracies in this SDL, but we can see it's a big file. It was 132,393 lines. Big file. It's obviously going to vary based on what's in your org because it is an org-specific schema. We'll go ahead and close that up for the moment, and we can see that we no longer have red here. We no longer have red here. Disappeared since we came back and it reevaluated. What we do have is code completion. for types, for operations. We can see that name has a value and a display value, and we can get the label off of it. You can see that functions are available as appropriate for things that are subject to functions, like convert currency and format here. So you can now actually author your GraphQL queries against your schema confidently, and you can know that if you mess something up, that it's invalid. So you'll know in real time. This is not something that now has to be tested at runtime. If you've got syntax errors, you can see those. So it can't resolve this, and we can see there's actually, unbalanced braces. So you're getting all that in real time. You can navigate to the canonical definition of it in the schema, and you can navigate within the schema to understand what types of things are available. But of course, you can also use code completion to do that. We can add a new field, so we could say something like active, and we want to get the value from active, right? So we can actually do those types of operations in code completion navigation. Now, I've mentioned earlier that I would point out any differences between commercial IDEs and free, say, Community Edition or unlicensed IDEs. And one of them is going to be that while it supports navigation and code completion and validation, syntax highlighting, things like that, and it supports auto indent, it doesn't support a full formatter. So if I try to format this file, and you have to trust me, I just hit the format file keystroke, it didn't actually do that. And the reason is, without going into too much detail, is that the same way that we're using LSP for IJ in order to get JavaScript and TypeScript support here and CSS elsewhere, it doesn't have a first class abstract syntax tree. The IDE does not for this. The language server does, but the IDE doesn't. So this is not technically, from the IDE's perspective, a template string literal, so it can't use string literal injection. I'm basically doing that in Community Edition IDEs to simulate it. That's what's giving you code completion, navigation, things like that. And in a commercial IDE, you would have full language injection, but that's why you don't have a formatter. I may look at whether I can proxy the formatter into Community Edition IDEs as well. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying one of the things that's missing is code formatting. Now, what can we do beyond completion and navigation, stuff like that? Well, we can take this query and we can actually open it in a GraphQL specific scratch file. And in that case, it's no longer kind of seen as an injected language. The formatter works. I don't know if that made sense about the difference between injected language and first class language. Hopefully it did, but the point is that there are going to be just some very minor limitations in Community Edition / free IDEs around some of these features like formatting until/unless I see if I can support those as well. But now we've opened this in a .graphql file, in this case a scratch GraphQL file, and you can see that we actually do have formatting. If I format this, it puts it back where it's supposed to be. But we have some other things that are interesting. We have obviously a variable that was passed in here from the original query. We can actually edit that variable. So we can say min amount. You don't put the dollar when you do this, colon, and then we'll go ahead and put it into double quotes, and we'll put just some really big number. And now we can execute the query. You can see it actually knows the Salesforce GraphQL API endpoint, and it's got this execute GraphQL, so I'm going to hit the keystroke for that. And we got back, as a result, we got back one result that's obviously bigger than that. If we make that a lower number and execute the query again, we'll get multiple results. So now we're actually working with not just a GraphQL query against the Salesforce org live. We're doing it parameterized, the way that it would be in your actual usage in your Lightning Web Components GraphQL API invocations. So this gives you a very, very powerful way to author your queries, to verify your queries, to verify parameterized queries. Before we dive into the next major feature, one thing I want to point out is the way that it's able to execute this query is that whenever it retrieved the schema and compiled the schema, it generated a GraphQL config.yaml file, and in it put not just the schema, but by default it also added a default project, which is just part of the GraphQL config, with both that schema and the actual endpoint and how it can authenticate to that endpoint to execute queries. Now, this is actually pulling the access token if you're using a CLI-based connection, or the session ID if you're using a native connection. And that can get stale. And when these queries execute, when I come over and execute the query, it doesn't actually consult me. I haven't found a way for it to consult Illuminated Cloud to make sure it has a live or fresh active session ID. So you may occasionally executing a query, if your session ID or access token's timed out, you may see that it's expired, and I've given you the ability very quickly to refresh that information. So you can just come over here and do this refresh Salesforce GraphQL configuration. It will log in again. It will put a new session token or access token or session ID here. If it has to change the endpoint URL, it will do that. This will all be up to date. Now, I can understand that there might be a concern with there actually being a session ID in a plain text file sitting in the root of your project. Now, for what it's worth, if you're using CLI-based connections, the same thing is sitting in your home directory under .sftx in the .json file for this connection. So it's not like this isn't already sitting there, and it's not an encrypted password or something like that. This is an access token or a session ID. It's a transient thing that times out and has to get refreshed, has to get replaced. But for the duration of the time that it is active, that it is valid, I mean, it could be used if someone got access to it. They would need access to your machine. But I can understand if you didn't want this sitting in this file. So if that's the case, opening back up those application level configuration options, you can turn off include connection information, and you can still have the schema. But if you get rid of projects here, and I say retrieve Salesforce GraphQL schema, and it will take a second as it hits that endpoint, retrieves it, transforms it into SDL and saves it, but it will also update this file, and it will not include that connection information. And so we can see that it did not include the connection information in this case. And I can still work with a live schema. It's keeping that up to date. I just can't execute queries anymore. So it's up to you as to which way you want to go on that. But if I re-enable that option, I'm comfortable with that transient session ID being there, and I just tell it to refresh this, it'll add that default project back, and I can once again execute queries. So up to you, but I just wanted to point out that potential concern. It defaults to populating that. If you're not comfortable with that, just turn it off. Okay, so far we've shown how Illuminated Cloud will help you install and configure this plugin, have it fetch the query, fetch the schema via the introspection query from the project's organization, and make it so you can then work with these GraphQL queries both embedded and standalone, parameterized or not, against the live org. Now, having said that, while it's easier to author these queries now that we have code completion, I still don't, at least speaking for myself, don't find GraphQL to be the most intuitive query language in the world. I find SOQL to be much more intuitive. So it sure would be nice if we could convert a SOQL query into a GraphQL query, and that's exactly what I'm about to show. Now, I want to put a caveat on the front end that this is an incomplete feature. As I will show in the demo as we go forward, I've handled translation of a lot of different SOQL features and converting them into their GraphQL analogs, but not all are there. Some clauses are missing. Some may not even be relevant for GraphQL. Some features are missing for specific clauses. I'll point those out as I go along, and I plan to add support for those. But right now, it is not 100% complete, so we'll call this like a beta level feature. So anywhere that you have a SOQL query, that could be as a static query in Apex, as a dynamic query in Apex injected, where you're doing like database.query, things like that, or a .soql file, or the SOQL query tool window, you're going to get a context option that is open in Scratch files GraphQL query. You can see this one has a bind expression, so let's look at what happens. So it has created a new Scratch file that is named after the source file, if relevant, and it shows the line number of the query, and it brought it over, and it translated this bind expression into an input variable, and it inferred the correct data type based on the left-hand side of that expression, its GraphQL data type. And the reason it's important to do the GraphQL data type is, for example, in SOQL, both string and ID can be used for something that expects an ID, but in GraphQL it must be an ID. So it's constraining it to the GraphQL data type. And it translated that query. Let's go ahead and actually split this. We'll go ahead and split right, and we'll go back over here, and we can see that this query select ID from account. So we're selecting from account. We selected ID where name equals bind variable social account. So that's a pretty straightforward translation. We can again populate that variable if we want. So we'll say social account, and we'll say foo. I will execute that query, and we can see that there was one of those named foo, and if we change it to bar, we can see that it found none named bar. So you're actually doing, again, live query execution of your SOQL query with a bind expression translated into a GraphQL query, and we're actually populating that variable. Let's look at another example, and here we have a dynamic query. We have, go ahead and close this. It is database.getCursor, and it uses a dynamic date literal or parameterized date literal. And so I'll go ahead and open that, and I'll move that over to the right. And so we can see that select ID from contact, select from contact ID, where last activity date equals last in days 400, last in days parameterized 400. So a pretty straightforward translation. I don't think we have any rows that are going to fulfill this. So you can see that in Apex, let's look at some other places where we can do this. Let's go to the SOQL query tool window. I'll go ahead and move this up. I've actually put some examples that show some of the things that get translated properly right now, some of the more complex ones, and we'll show the translations. So here's one that's kind of a master detail. So header and basically parent-child rows being retrieved. We've got an order by, the subrelations order has an order by, things like that. Again, I'm going to bring up the context menu, but you'll notice that there's also a toolbar button to do this. So there's two different ways to do this here, and it translated it. And let's take a look at it. So we selected from shopping list. So for top level queries by shopping list, and we selected from it. ID name and store, so ID name and store, and then from the subrelation items, we queried ID name amount units added, that maps, and this has an order by name ascending, and this has an order by name ascending with nulls ordered last. And so if we execute this query, we get back, and you can see the subrelations nested here and things like that. So we get back the GraphQL response to that. Okay, let's look at another one. So here's one that has a deeper level of nesting, like 5 different levels of nesting, and we're going to translate that. And I'm not going to verify this in detail, but we can see that we get a deeply nested query, and if we execute it, we would obviously get those results. For accounts, let's see, we have a much more complex query here that has a composite where clause that has a logical expression conjoining one expression with as an and with an OR expression. We have relational expressions including an in expression. We've got multiple order bys. We have an indirect queried field. So let's translate this. So again, we're querying account, and we're querying these 3 fields. So we're querying name, ID name, account number, and then last modified by .username, the values of all of those. And our where clause is composite. So we have an and of this expression that has an in with multiple values and an or of these 2 expressions. And we have multiple order bys. So pretty straightforward there. Aggregates in the select clause, in the order by clause, and additionally we have some indirect references, account.annual revenue, account.billing latitude, account.account number. So let's just see how this comes out. Let's translate that and see what we have. Okay, so we have, and I'm going to come to the error in just a moment. So from opportunity, we're ordering by, and we can see that we have from account, notice that it deduplicated. So from account, we are ordering by both account number and source, and probability, we're ordering by probability ascending, but we're doing that as an aggregate, some probability, and you can see this is red. You can see this is red because it says that probability is not it doesn't use an aggregate order by clause. That's coming from Salesforce, from their introspection API, but this is a legitimate query. It executes just fine, and things are aggregated for probability just fine. See, it says probability sum value. So this is a good example of the fact that while the introspection API is returning what's probably like a 98-99% valid schema, it's not perfect. There seem to be some omissions. There seem to be some incorrect representations. This is one of them. So just because something gets translated and it seems to get flagged with an error, it doesn't mean it's incorrect. It may be. Illuminated Cloud may well be translating things improperly, and if so, I want you to log a bug. But this is an example of a place where it's not. And the other error is really a transitive error showing that something in the order by is not correct. So let's go back over and show the next one, a semi-join. So here we're actually using a subquery in the where clause as a semi-join, and it's going to represent a little bit different. So in the where clause, we are saying the ID is in, and notice that the operator is in queue for in query, and there's also in queue, not in query. And here it's saying for opportunity where stage name equals closed one, the value we want back, you can only include one, is API. Its API name is account ID, and then what we want is ID and name from the resulting accounts. So that was translated just fine. Qualifications. This isn't actually required, but it's allowed. So we're querying from account, and you can qualify as account.name, kind of as a pseudo alias. And if this were an actual alias, which aliases aren't supported right now, it's one of the things I don't have in the translation, then those would be used. But in this case, these aren't necessary, and when you actually translate this into GraphQL, those qualifications get dropped. So here's the corresponding query, and then of course functions, the ability to query and transform your data via functions. And so we can see here that we have queried again at dedupe, because we had two functions on annual revenue. So from annual revenue, we want both the converted currency and the format, and if we execute that, then we can see for annual revenue we get that. So that was kind of exhaustive in terms of what's supported now. It's not 100% exhaustive in terms of everything that's supported, but it shows major features that are supported. But things that are not, like I said, aliases are not, the ability to query in a from clause from multiple entities, which is tightly related to aliases. The use of some functions, non-aggregating functions in some places, and then things like limit and offset that may translate to some analogs in GraphQL. I need to investigate whether they do or not, but some other clauses are not supported anyway. So I'm going to fill in those gaps. If you find other gaps, please let me know about them. If you find things that aren't translated properly, let me know about them. In either case, I think I said this earlier, please include an example of the input SOQL, the expected GraphQL, and any relevant documentation on that translation or mapping, and I'll go ahead and get it implemented. My goal is to get this so that you can pretty much take any SOQL query that can be translated into GraphQL and have it translated into the correct GraphQL. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show. Again, just kind of a recap. Illuminated Cloud now helps you get the GraphQL plugin installed and configured properly. It helps you get the org-specific schema so that it's being used. If you desire, it helps you to, in that configuration file, to add a connection to your organization so that queries can be run directly against it, GraphQL queries. It helps you translate from SOQL into the corresponding GraphQL. It understands things like bind expressions and allows you to do variable substitution whenever you execute those queries. So pretty complete integration, hopefully. Certainly, if I'm missing something other than omissions in the translation, let me know about those as well. But hopefully this will make GraphQL a lot more palatable when working with it in Salesforce projects. If you have any questions, if you have any issues, let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time and take care.